Hi guys, it's Danny. Okay, so today we will be discussing about how to and when to water Cattleya orchids. There are a few factors that play a role here, so first we will talk about the preferences of this orchid, and then I'll give you a few examples of how and when to water orchids depending on your environment and potting media and so on. So let's start with the preferences of a Cattleya orchid when it comes to watering. As a general rule, and for the vast majority of cases, Cattleya orchids don't like to stay moist all the time. They like to dry out between waterings. Also, they like to be very ventilated in the root system area. So watering should be done when our Cattleya orchid is completely dried off. The best way to know when our orchid needs water is to look at the media and at the root system. When you notice that the whole media and the root system is dried off, it is safe to water your orchid. If you look at the roots of a Cattleya orchid, you will notice they are actually white. In some cases, Cattleya orchid roots can become green when moist. So if you look at your orchid and you see that the roots are green, your orchid might not need water. If, however, they are white, most probably they are dry and you're safe to water your orchid. Using clear plastic pots can actually help you if you don't know when to water your orchid, because you can look at the media. And you can see in my example here that the media is completely dry, the roots are white, so this orchid is actually good for watering. However, if your Cattleya orchid is not potted in a clear plastic pot, all you need to do is insert a finger inside the media. Try to go 2 or 3 centimeters deep. Now when you pull it off, you should not feel any moisture on your finger. If you feel a little bit of moisture, just wait another day and try it again tomorrow. In time, you will actually notice when all the media becomes completely dry. So as a conclusion, Cattleya orchids really like to dry off between waterings. When you notice all the media and the roots are completely dry, you are safe to water the orchid. If they are just a little bit moist, you should wait 1 or 2 more days. Now that we know the Cattleya orchid preferences when it comes to water, let us discuss about when and how to water our orchid. As I told you in the beginning of this video, this will depend on a few factors. So let's start with the potting media. Because Cattleya orchids do like to dry off pretty fast between waterings, and also they like a lot of ventilation around the root system, most of the times Cattleyas will be potted in pure bark chips, no sphagnum moss. Using bark is especially good if your environment is pretty cold. It's pretty logical. The colder the environment is, the slower the water will evaporate. Bark chips do not retain as much water, so they will actually dry off faster. So for any environment that is either humid, either cold, bark chips can actually be appropriate for Cattleya orchids. Bark chips are also an ideal media in an environment that has fluctuations. My environment, for example, has distinct 4 seasons. So in the summertime, it can get pretty warm and pretty dry. But in the wintertime, it can get cold and humid. So bark chips is actually an overall media for me. But as I told you, bark chips do not retain a lot of water. So when I water my Cattleya orchid, especially in the summertime when it is warm and water evaporates faster, I like to soak the orchid. So for this, I actually use a decorative pot in which I place my orchid. Then I fill up a watering can with lukewarm water and fill the pot to the brim of the actual plastic pot in which the orchid is potted in. Never use too cold or too hot water with orchids. So as you can see, the water level is actually to the brim of the plastic pot in which the orchid is potted in. Now I let this orchid sit like this for about 10 or 15 minutes, time in which I can go about do some other chores, and I will come back when this orchid is properly soaked. After 10 or 15 minutes, my orchid is properly hydrated, also the media absorbed a little bit of water, it's time to pull out the orchid. So what I do is pull out the orchid, let it drain just a little bit, and actually drain the whole pot very, very well. For this, I use a separate tray. I place it here, and I actually dispose of the water that I soaked my orchid in. After a few more minutes, my orchid is completely drained. So just pull out the orchid and try to see if there's anything dripping. And when there's nothing dripping, you know that there isn't any excess water trapped in the pot. So at this point, you can actually see the media is wet, and also the roots have greened up, or at least some of them. So you know now that your orchid is hydrated and does not need water. So after your orchid is drained and there is no excessive water at the bottom of the pot, you can place the orchid back in its place. If you keep it in a decorative pot, you can place it in the decorative pot. And now she's good to go until the next time you need to water it. Now, as I said, I do this in the summertime when my temperature is really warm and also humidity is kind of low. But in the wintertime, my growing room can become pretty cold and pretty humid. In the wintertime, I don't actually soak my orchid. What I do in the wintertime is actually go to the sink and water it at the faucet. When you water it at the faucet, you want to make sure that you completely water all the media, but never pour water on top of the orchid, only on top of the media. So I completely water the whole media and then again let the orchid drain off in a separate tray. When my orchid is completely drained of excessive water, I simply place it back in its place. Now, as you can see, when you should water your orchid completely depends on your environment, season, and so on. So for this reason, I never say to people water once a week or every 10 days or every 5 days, because it's just so variable. And I think it's more important to understand when the orchid needs water than to just give you a number of days. For example, I water every 5 days in the summertime, but every 10 days in the wintertime, simply because this is how my environment is. Now, the type of media your orchid is potted in can actually dictate when it will dry off. So as I told you, my Cattleya orchids are potted mainly in bark chips. Some of them have a few strains of sphagnum moss. Now, when you have a combination between sphagnum moss and bark chips, your media will actually dry off slower. This can be beneficial in a very warm or very dry environment, but detrimental in a very cold or very humid environment. But this is a different subject that I will not discuss here. But just keep in mind the type of media can actually dictate how often you need to water your orchid. If you keep your Cattleya orchid mounted or bare root, you might actually need to water every day or every 2 days. So this is why it's important to understand when a Cattleya needs water. And for the main part, they like to dry off their roots before they get rewatered. Okay everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video and it was helpful to you. If you want to watch more videos from me, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You can leave me questions or suggestions in the comments below and I will get back to you either with a comment or with a video. And also if you just like to stay in touch with me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and you have the links below. I will see you next time. Bye bye!